name is Brie Castellini. I used to be a spy.
My name is Chris Cherry. I used to be in The Wiggles.
And this is Burn Notice, a weekly rewatch of the USA Television masterpiece Burn Notice about Michael Weston, a spy. First, some context for this intro episode. If you've never seen Burn Notice before, shame on you. It's currently on Hulu and probably other places, but I didn't want to do any research. And according to IMDb, it can be summed up as a spy, recently disavowed by the US government, uses his special ops training to help others in trouble. We'll get into the premise more since we're obviously talking about every episode of this series ever, so you'll hear a lot more details. But at its core, this is a 7-season series that premiered in 2007 and stars Jeffrey Donovan playing Michael Weston, a spy.
A spy. Throughout this podcast, we'll be rating each episode on whether it is an episode of television, a great episode of television, or a great episode of Burn Notice.
So those second two ratings, a great episode of television and a great episode of Burn Notice, aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but they are unique in how we measure them. A great episode of television has good writing and storytelling, but a great episode of Burn Notice, according to us, Brie and Chris, has at least 3 of the following criterion.
1. Michael Weston solves a weekly problem with spycraft rather than violence.
2. Michael Weston's spy advice voiceover involves practical spy advice rather than passive spy observations.
3. Michael Weston debuts or revisits a distinct alias.
4. The show's sidekicks, Sam and Fiona, are used well, meaning that A. Fiona gets to blow something up or use her explosives expertise, and or Sam gets to be peak Bruce Campbell. Chris, what does peak Bruce Campbell mean?
Really hammy and really slimy, but in a good way.
I was going to say peak Bruce Campbell is kind of like pornography. You know it when you see it.
That's true.
So the reason that we've made these very good criterion is that procedural television, which Burn Notice is definitely a part of, has different rules than regular episodic or serialized television, and we think that's neat.
You think that's neat. I'm kind of iffy.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Best practice is that you should watch the show along with us because it's a show.
And that's how that works.
Exactly. Because we will not be shying away from spoilers, so keep that in mind. And if you or anyone you know loves Burn Notice, please send them this podcast. Better yet, if you or anyone you know knows Jeffrey Donovan, please get in touch. You can send us questions, suggestions, compliments, and no criticism of any kind at burnnoticedpodcast@gmail.com or our Twitter, burnnoticedpod.
But first, since this is our intro episode, I'm sure you are dying to know who are these sultry tones you're listening to. Chris, who the fuck are you?
I'm Chris Cherry. I am a writer and filmmaker and actor. That's in order of preference, but not in credit. Mm-hmm. I wrote and directed the web series Relativity, as well as writing the stage version of said show, Relativity. I also co-starred in the web series Sam and Pat Are Depressed and its spin-off podcast, Brie and Chris Are Depressed, which
no relation.
No relation. They have nothing to do with each other.
I also worked on a show called Sam and Pat Are Depressed, but unrelated.
Yeah, it's a different show. Beyond that, I've written some short films. I also co-wrote a novel called Road Trippy that is coming out at some point in the future. Mm-hmm. And that's about it for now.
For now.
There will be more.
I'm Brie Castellini. I'm a queer writer, director, actor, also in order of preference, but not necessarily in credit. I created and wrote Sam and Pat Are Depressed, the web series that Chris mentioned. He also wrote on it during season 2 and was an executive producer, so don't let him trick you. He's talented, but it's hard to tell sometimes. Uh-huh. That's a show about 2 depressed roommates who make jokes about therapy. It's not as much of a bummer as it sounds like. I also created and starred in the web series Brains, which has 2 seasons and 2 extended universe projects, a miniseries and a short film. I wrote and directed the short film Ace and Anxious, which has like 45,000 views on YouTube at the time of recording this, which I like to drop in because it's the only number about me that's impressive in any remote way. You can find it on YouTube and Amazon Prime, as well as the LGBT streaming service Revry. I co-wrote and directed a short film called Buy-In. I directed an upcoming web series called Better With You, coming out fall 2019, and I am a deep, unabashed, unironic lover of Burn Notice. We're going to make a lot of jokes on this podcast about Burn Notice, a show about a spy, because it's a ridiculous show, but I really enjoy it. I enjoyed it as a child, although I never actually finished watching it. I've only seen through maybe season 5 of the 7 seasons, so at a certain point, this podcast will get very exciting for me. And also, Burn Notice I credit with keeping me alive, because also, not a joke, a lot of Michael Weston, a spy tips that he gives out are really good tips for being a woman in the world. It teaches you to be vigilant and observant and lose a tail, and those are all very real things I've had to use in my day-to-day life. So, Burn Notice, thank you for being amazing, and I cannot wait to rewatch every single episode with my very good friend, Chris Cherry.
I'm less on board with Burn Notice. I also watched I would say I watched a similar amount of Burn Notice as it aired, probably up to around season 4 or 5, before just kind of losing track with it. It's because life happened.
And also, we're millennials and a lot of us don't have cable anymore. So
Exactly.
It's very hard to keep up with, actively airing television.
Exactly. And I think one of the things about this show that I kind of hope, is a major theme is sort of the artistic merit of procedural television and the sort of shows of peak TV and the golden age of TV that weren't the obvious sort of greatest hits of golden age TV, and
they wouldn't show up on any list. Burn Notice is never going to be on the same list as Mad Men.
Exactly.
But it should be.
And that is a list of shows that were on TV.
Yep. Those are the only 2.
Yes. And that's sort of my motivation behind wanting to do this.
And my motivation is that I made a joke on Twitter a while back about how I wanted to start a Burn Notice podcast called Burn Noticed. And then I made a joke about it on our other podcast, Brie and Chris Are Depressed, which is our completely inaccessible comedy mental health podcast about our web series that's also somewhat inaccessible, called Simon Pat Are Depressed. And through some, really well-timed rants about Burn Notice during the recording of that other podcast, I convinced Chris Cherry to do this podcast with me. And now I get to rewatch Burn Notice and talk about it every week, and I'm extremely excited.
It turns out if you make a joke about something enough times, it happens.
Yeah, that's what I'm learning. I will never learn my lesson. I will just do this for the rest of my life, probably. Jeffrey Donovan, please come on the show. Yeah. I don't want anyone else. I will not talk to anyone else from Burn Notice until Jeffrey Donovan comes on this show.
But once that happens,
then it's fucking fair game.
Yeah.
Matt Nix, you can come on anytime after you get me Jeffrey Donovan. This podcast will premiere its first full episode where we will discuss the pilot of Burn Notice, July 22nd, 2019. If it's past that date, it's already out, and you'll get a new episode of Burn Notice every Monday from now until we either die, get bored, or finish the series. So, with that in mind, thank you so much for listening to this very good intro episode. Certainly more coherent than our other intro episode for our other podcast. And I hope you enjoy getting burned up.
I noticed that.